Hello everyone, my name is Lydia and welcome. Today we're going to be painting summer crops with Red Barn. I'll go over the materials that you need to do the painting and we'll walk through the painting step by step together. I'll also list the materials that you need in the description box below. In addition, I'll provide a photo of the finished painting on my Instagram account, Lydia Pangborn Art. For those of you that have subscribed, thank you very much. It helps the channel grow. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so and hitting that like button. So grab your paints, your brushes, and something to stay hydrated, and I'll meet you back at the easel. So the materials we're going to be using today are 16 by 20 inch stretched and primed canvas. The colors I'm going to be using are acrylic paints in the colors of Cadmium Red Medium, Cadmium Orange Medium, Cadmium Yellow Medium, Yellow Ochre, Hooker's Green, Ultramarine Blue, Dioxazine Purple, Burnt Sienna. These are both titanium white, and then I have some unbleached titanium white as well. Feel free to switch up those colors any way that you'd like. And I'm going to be using 4 brushes today, and the largest brush I'm going to be using is my 1-inch flat brush. This is mainly just so I can get some quick coverage on my larger canvas. Then I'm going to be using a 1/2-inch flat brush. This is about a 1/4 inch filbert brush, and then a small round brush. You're going to want a jar of water for rinsing your brushes, and a paper towel or an old cloth for drying your brushes. And it's nice to have a mister bottle to keep your paints nice and damp, or even to spritz on the canvas if you need to. Okay, so I'm making some general guidelines, and these do not have to be perfect. We can actually correct them as we go because we're going to have a barn and some banks of trees. But I did come down from the top about 4.5 inches. So if you want to pull your ruler out and do that, you can, or you can estimate it. It's up to you. But if you take your ruler, this is my 4.5 inches, and I just made a little mark. And then over here, I did the same thing, about 4.5 inches down from the top, made a mark. And then I just did a little connecting of the two. And I'm just doing this with some kids' chalk. You don't have to even make a full straight line if you don't want to. But then I came down for this mark. I wanted to come about 7 inches here, and then over here about 10 inches. So I measured from the top, 7 inches, and I put a mark. So if you take your ruler and you measure down, it's about 7 inches. And then over here, I measured down about 10 inches from the top. It doesn't have to be exact. And then I just drew some guidelines to make sure that I angle, because I'm going to have a little angled grass area, and that's going to transition nicely into my crop lines, which we'll talk about later in the painting. So I'm going to start with my 1-inch flat brush. I don't want this guy to have too much detail, so it's just going to be a nice simple gradient of dark blue to lighter blue. And then we're going to start to just put in a base coat of our green here, and then we'll switch it up and do a little bit more of a earthy color down through here. So I'm going to take my 1-inch flat brush, and I am getting it wet, and I'm wiping off the excess water, and I'm going to get a little bit of my ultramarine blue, and then I'm going to get quite a bit of white on one side of my brush. So it's about maybe, I'm going to get a little bit more of that white. So it's a big section of white. I would say about 1/4 of blue to a full of the white. And I'm just going to start at the top and get my X strokes going. And I'm going to work straight across to keep this darker color at the top. So I'm going to do the same thing, get some of my white, same amount of blue, and come in and work across the top. And then as I go down from the top, working my way down closer to the ground area, I'm gonna pick up less of the blue and more of the white. So I'm gonna come in and I'm just gonna get just the white only, and this is just my titanium white, and I'm gonna come right below where I started and just put that white down in to the area below where I just left off. And then I'm gonna wet my brush a little bit, and I'm just gonna go back and forth across the top. And if you feel like you're not getting good coverage, maybe your paints are student grade paints, don't have as much pigment, you certainly can go in and do a second coat. I just got a little more water, and I'm just gonna sweep across, and then you can see if there's maybe another coat you might wanna put on or not. Like I said, I don't want this to be, the sky is not gonna be the main focal point here, so I'm not really worried about it. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come down now. I'm not rinsing my brush out. I'm gonna grab some of my blue, bring it over to my yellow ochre, and I'm just gonna get those mixed in together. I want a bit of a darker green, add a little more blue. I'm gonna press my brush down into that so I can pick up quite a bit of that paint. And I'm gonna come in and just lay down this greenish blue color. And here's where, if you want to straighten your line up, you can just take the edge of your brush and just go along and straighten the line up a little. It's not a big deal. We're going to have some trees back here, so it's perfectly fine if it's a little off. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to pick up a little bit more of that paint, so a little bit more of the ultramarine blue and the yellow ochre. And just start working that in. I'm going to go along here. I'm just going to lay my brush flat and come across and just kind of work that in. And once we got some good coverage there, it doesn't have to be completely covered. This is just our first layer. I am not going to rinse my brush out. I'm going to come right down into my burnt sienna. I'm going to add a little bit of my white to that. And if it gets, some of that green gets into it, it's fine. And I'm just going to come put my base coat here for my field, the crop area. I'm going to go just below where my green is, and I can actually just start to make little strokes here just to blend it a little more if I need to. We'll get those lines straighter as we go, just to get some good coverage. And then as I move down a little bit, I am going to go ahead and reach in to grab just a drop of my Dioxazine Purple and mix it in to my burnt sienna and come on down, and that'll make it a little darker down here as it gets closer to the viewer. And I'm just going to press my brush to get the paint off and just continue to work those X strokes just to blend it. And you can see there's areas where that green came through, and that's just fine. And I do keep dipping in every once in a while and getting some water, because I did gesso this canvas because I had something else on it. So it is a gessoed canvas, which is really going to continue to absorb the paint a little bit until I get that first layer on. So that's why I'm having to work it a little bit, but I'm okay with that. So we're gonna let this dry. I'm gonna clean out this brush and put it away. And you're gonna need your chalk because we are going to draw in some lines in our barn. And you may even want to have your ruler because that's gonna be very helpful for this painting. So now we're gonna talk about the drawing. So we're gonna need your chalk and your ruler if you have one, or you can do some estimates and we'll do a little bit of both. I went ahead and filled in the base coat of the barn and I put some lines in so that we can do this easily and quickly together, and you'll have some markers for yourself. So for the barn, I decided that I want the barn to be on this side of the canvas, and I wanted it to be in slightly, but not on the center, but in slightly from the right-hand side of the canvas here. So I came in about 2 inches and I came down, so if you see, I came in about 2 inches and then I came down about 3.5 inches and I made a little mark. So just put a little dot there. And then this little line is maybe about 1.5 inches, and I just drew a little line 1.5 inches. And this little line is about 2.5 inches. So I'm just making a little box. So I'm gonna have a little line that's about 1.5 inches that matches on this side, and then a little line over here that matches the bottom line. So I'm creating just that side of the barn. Then I came down from the top about 2 inches, and I went in over about 3.5 inches, and I put a little dot. Then I went over another about 2.5 to 3 inches and I put a little dot. And that gives me another place of reference for my rooftop. So then I just connect my dots. And you can make this 2.5, 3 inches if you want a bigger barn, maybe 3 inches. A smaller one, about 2 inches. You want to make sure you get it to scale with the size of your canvas. And then if you want, you can have just draw a straight line across here to give yourself a little point of reference. And that line was about 1, 2, 3 inches. And so about 3 inches over, and then I connect. So I made a little triangle, and then I can draw straight down. So this line here matches this line over here. And then I wanted a little shelter over here. So this is gonna be more like a barn where you might pull things into your tractors for the evening, or you may stack some wood over here. So over here, I just drew a little angled line down about 1 inch or so, and then another inch straight line down. And for the barn door, you can do a door on it or just leave it open. But for the opening, I decided I wanted to have 2 little pieces that were angled. So you can draw a straight line down, and you can make sure that this line here that goes on the top of the doorway has about the same amount on each side. And then you can just draw down to the ground once you have that established. So now for your crop lines. So what we're going to have is we're going to have a perspective, but the perspective of that one point is going to be somewhere off the canvas. So you still want to have your lines look like they're starting to disappear and coming closer together on your canvas, but they're going to end somewhere out beyond the canvas to a point. So what I've done is I've taken my ruler, and if you recall, we came down on this side about 10 inches. And you can do this flat. It may be easier to lay your canvas flat on a table. But from there, I came down about another 1.5 inches. So this will be about 11.5 inches. I made a dot. So that's about 1.5 inches. So as my lines get closer to me this way, I want them to start to widen out. So I'm going to have, this is just where my grass meets. So this is the first crop line. So I put 1.5 inches between here. So I'm going to put another 1.5 inches between here. So 10 to 11.5, 11.5 to 13. So those two will be about the same distance apart. But now this one I want to make a little wider, because as it comes closer into the viewer, it's going to be wider. So when things are in the background, they compress. But as they come closer, they decompress. So in order to do that, I have about my 10, 11 and a half, 13, and this one is about 15. So it's just, so this is about 16 inches this side of my canvas. I came up about half an inch to an inch here. So it's around about 15. So then you have 1, 2, 3 lines of crops you can work with, crop lines you can work with. So if you remember on this side, we came down from the top 7 inches. So this line, I'm going to make a dot, I measured, make a dot at 7.5, make a dot at 8, and make a dot at 8.5. So now I have 3 dots on this side and 3 dots on this side that are not as wide apart as they are on this side. So I can start to connect. So I connect my 11.5 inch mark with my 7.5 inch, and I drew a line. I connect my 13 inch mark on this side of the canvas with my 8 inch. And then I connect my 15 inch mark on this side with my 9. So they're angling parallel to the angle that I made here. So that goes all the way down to this crop line. So that takes care of these. Now as you're looking at it, things are going to start to fan out more. So it's going to go from being at an angle that's going to be pretty much running along the same angle as this line for these first lines. But these other lines, things are going to have to widen out because, again, they're getting closer to the viewer. So on the bottom, what I did, this is the 20 inch side of my canvas, is I made a mark. So here's my 20 inch. I made a mark at 15, a mark at about 10, a mark at about 5, and I did want a little tiny little mark here, so I made this at about 2.5 over here, so I have a little bit of a crop line there. So we stopped at 9 over here, so now I'm at 9.5, 10, and then I made these last two a little bit more wide because it's closer. So this one is 11.5 point, and this one is a 13.5 point. So it gives me a little bit of width. So up here, it's about every 1/2 inch, and then I started doing about 1.5 inches and 1.5 inches between these two. And then all I did is I connected my dot, first dot here goes up to my 9 inch line. My second dot here goes up to my 10 inch line. My third dot goes up to the 11.5, and then I just did a 13.5 in my little 2.5 inch line here. And that's a nice way to try to get your crop lines to seem as though they're coming closer to you by widening them out and fanning them out. So to review, 10, 11.5, 13, 15. You've got the 10 matching the 7 that we originally came down, 7.5, 8, and 9. And that gives you your first rows. Then you go along the bottom, you have one that comes in 5 inches, 10 inches, 15 inches, and I just did a little extra one here at about 2.5 inches. And we pick back up. So we did 7, 7.5, 8, 9. So we pick back up 9.5, 10, and then we get a little wider, 11.5 and 13.5. And then you just connect those dots. And the last thing is I am going to have a little bank of trees back here all the way on the back side of the barn. And I just filled the barn in so you can see it. We're going to use our 1/2 inch filbert brush on the next step, and we'll get our trees, some grass, and we'll work on getting some beginnings of a crop of choice. All right, so I have my filbert brush. I did wet it, and it's a really stiff bristle brush here, and it's real important that your brush is stiff and bristly because we're going to be putting in doing some little scrubbing motions to put our background trees in and our grasses in. So everything in the background gets a little cooler, so I'm going to work with this blue. I'm going to bring in some of my Ultramarine Blue. And I'll start working in a little bit of this Hooker's green. I would say it's going to lean a bit more to the green than the blue side, but it's almost 50-50, but maybe slightly more green than blue. And we're just going to come in and just start to put in, I'm going to add a little bit of white to that. There we go. I want it to be a little bit less transparent there. And I'm just going to start to randomly put in, and I can follow along the lines. I can change them if I want. But if I use the very tip of my little brush and push down, I can make some nice pointed little bush lines or tree lines. And I'm just going to work all the way across at the very tops of these little bushy areas. And even if I touch my barn right now, that's okay, because we have a lot of work left to do on that yet. Get a little bit more white in there. And I add a little more white, and I'm going to start to get a little bit more blue there. Just added a little more white to that. And I'm just going to start to work that into the very bottom part. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. A little bit more of the darker blue-green over here. And we'll be able to straighten up the barn as we go. And then I'm just going to take this and just kind of scrub it out at the bottom, because we're going to be adding some grassy areas. All right, and we'll come back to that in just a little bit. We're going to let that dry. I'm not going to rinse my brush out. I'm going to go ahead and pick up a little bit of my yellow ochre and bring that up here. So maybe about, it's a little bit more green than blue, and then I'm going to bring in about a quarter of as much of my yellow ochre in. And I'm actually just going to scumble this in, just scrape it across the canvas. All the way across. Get some more, saturate my brush with some paint, and just scrape it all the way across. And it can go right up to the very base of the barn. I may add a little bit more yellow now as I come forward and make it have a bit more of the yellow ochre in it. And go ahead and scrape that across. I'm gonna get a little bit more water on my brush. Come in, yellow ochre, green, blue, and just keep scraping that in. Make it a little bit more yellow. And we're going to be putting in some grassy and sandy areas in just a little bit. So you can make your crops anything you want. I think I'm going to keep them more looking like maybe a bean crop. So it's going to be very painterly, very impressionistic. So I'm going to come here and I'm just going to start to make little, right along the lines that I drew, I'm just going to make little random strokes here. Add a little bit more white to that. There we go. Right now we're just putting in all these nice, cooler looking colors before we start to warm everything up. I just picked up a little bit more yellow, the yellow ochre, not the brighter yellow yet. And we're just kind of creating these nice, loose strokes. And then I come in And I'm just going to keep working that all the way on each of my lines. So it can get a little smaller back here and work a little taller as we come forward on the line. So a little smaller back here. And a little taller as we work forward. And these are going to be, now the ones that are closer down in this corner, they're going to be quite tall. So all right, and it looks really random and a little messy right now, but that way we know that we have our lines going. We know where we're going with it all. And I'm going to take this paint, and I'm just going to push the rest of this paint, this green paint, off on my canvas here, just to get it off the brush. And then I'm going to come up, I didn't rinse the brush off, so I still have a little bit of that green left, but not a lot. I'm going to mix some white, about half amount of white and half amount of burnt sienna. And I'm just going to come in and just start to work just the way I just did. Just scrubbing in this color, and if you hit the green some, that's just perfectly fine. I'm just working to get our little crop lines in, and then this is just kind of the space between the crops. So it starts off small, starts off small, starts off small, and then it gets bigger as we go forward. And some of the spots we can hit, other spots we don't have to hit. And then while I have this paint, this burnt sienna and white, I'm going to add a little bit more white to it. And I'm just going to go ahead and start to come up here to the wood part of my barn and fill that in. And I'm going to have this be a little old weathered barn. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more white to that and some purple and quite a bit more white, and roll that off. There we go. I added a little bit more purple to it because I think I want it to look a little bit more weathered. And so when I go to put that final bit on it, it'll give it more of a weathered look. And I'm actually just trying to fill this in, cover up those chalk lines, and I'll get the rest of those chalk lines off once it dries. And we'll go back and refine that a little more as we go. I'm going to go ahead and pick up some of my orange, add it to my burnt sienna, a little more orange, and I'm just going to go ahead and push that in up here. I'll go ahead and play with that a little bit. We'll probably be changing these colors a little bit up here as well. Just putting that base coat down. Now I'm going to get this paint off my brush. I'm going to mix up some yellow ochre and green, about equal parts of each, and come over here and grab some of my titanium white, just the regular titanium white. And we're just going to start to work again, coming more forward, this time starting to warm things up a little bit. So I'm just going to come in here, I'm going to get a little bit more green So I think it's just going to be a little bit more green than yellow. And I'm just going to start to work that in. And we'll still see some of the color we put down first coming through. I'm going to work that all the way across. And then at the base of that, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm using the same color, I'm going to pull some of my cadmium red into it. And it's going to make it a little darker, add a little more green. And I'm going to come down into, get a little bit more green. So it's the green and yellow mixture here with a little bit of red added to it. And we're going to work that in. It's too much red. Mix that in a little better. There we go. And we'll just work some of that in. Get a little bit more green. I still want it to lean to the green side, greenish yellow side. There we go. But it's a little darker as we're coming forward, as though it's a second layer of paint. So we're going to let this dry, and we're going to come back in and start to add a bit more detail. We're going to clean our filbert brush out, and the next brush we're going to be using is our flat brush. Okay, so everything's dry. I wiped off the chalk lines, and we're going to be working with our flat brush now. So I've mixed up equal amounts of Hooker's green and my cadmium yellow. So here is that blend, and I added a little bit of titanium white to it. So I have my 1-inch flat brush, and I have wet it, but I've gotten most of the water out of it because this is a dry brush technique. And we're just going to be taking the paint and we're putting it on pretty thick, and we're going to be pressing down and pushing up in a flicking motion like this. So I'm going to get some of this paint, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to swipe it on quite thick. I'm going to come in and just pull up, pull, pull, pull. And I'm just going to keep working that motion all the way so I can bring some of that thick paint over and just pull it up. I'm pressing and pulling, pressing and pulling. And it's going to give more of this feeling of this nice, light, grassy area. I'm going to go straight across here, get all this paint off the brush, and then just pull up. A little more paint up here. So it's very thick paint, layer of paint. So don't be afraid to use a little bit of your paint here. And you can put some back at the base of the trees here. So that nice grassy wild look. And I'm going to come down and I'm just going to pick up a little bit more of just Hooker's green without rinsing my brush out. And I'm going to start to work that in as I'm moving forward. As I move forward a little bit closer to the crop line here, I'm going to start to work a little bit more of just that green color in, mixed in. And if you want to get some of that paint off the brush, and just flick it up. And we're going to be adding a little bit more grassy details as well. This is just another little layer here. And I just picked up a little bit of the green and a little bit more of that mixture of the green and yellow. And I'm just going to go ahead and put that in. All right, we're gonna let that dry and we're gonna rinse this brush out and we're gonna go back to our filbert brush. All right, so I've got my filbert brush. I'm gonna take some of this green color and I'm adding it to some titanium white. So I've taken this yellow-green color that I was using for the grass. I'm gonna move it over here into my titanium white. And I'm just gonna come back in and start to work it in to some of the top layers of my trees back here. And I'm just making little dot motions right at the very top. And I can work that and blend that in any way I want to. Just to create some light areas mixed in with those dark areas, not to cover up all the dark areas. So if I feel like I lost too much of my dark area, I can pick up some of the green and just work that in. And what I'm gonna do is I'm thinking about having, imagining that my light source may be coming from this side. And we'll just go ahead and work some of that down. And then I can get a little bit more of my darker green and just work that in. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of my purple and I'm going to bring it over into that same green. Maybe pick up a little bit more of my hooker's green and mix that in with some white and just start to kind of want it to be a little bit more green. And I've got mostly hooker's green mixed with a little bit of white, less white than is up here. And I'm just working that into the top layer of this closer layer of trees. And then I'm going to pick up some of my blue and purple and come down and mix that with my green and bring that in. Even lower. So that it gets darker down at the bottom. And I may even take some of that, put a little yellow in it, and start to work that in back in the very back so that we have some sunlight just hitting in the very back area back here. And we're going to have a little path in later on to the barn as well. And then I can make little strokes again to create some different types of little sandy areas. So I'm going to turn my brush on its edge and just take some of that lighter green and make little short strokes so it gives this illusion of like little tree line back here. There we go. So we're going to clean this brush out and we'll come back and work on our barn with our small round brush. Okay, I've decided that I'm going to make my barn a little small red barn. So I'm going to take my cadmium red and my cadmium orange and just mix those together and grab a little bit of my white. See what we come up with. All right, yeah, we're gonna go with that. So it's this, maybe this faded red barn. So get a little bit more cadmium red in that mix. And this way I can start to straighten up my lines a little bit. So I'm doing a little more red than orange, but I did add that orange to it. I have to fix my door a little bit there, but I'm going to go ahead and get this in. And you can make your barn whatever color you might want it. I've got a little layer of orange up there on the top, and I'm gonna make it more of a blue. So I'm taking that Ultramarine Blue, I'm gonna add some of the white to that, and I just rolled that reddish orange that was on my brush into it, so it creates this nice almost metal gray look. And I'm going to sweep that on, and that little orange color can stay a little bit as well underneath it. And then I'm going to get just purple, mix it in with my blue, add a little bit of the orange to it, so whatever's on my brush, I'm going to come in and get it kind of dark in here for now. And straighten up that a little bit. I'm going to make that door a little taller. That and that. There we go. All right. And I'm going to put this little opening back in over here. Get some of that light mixture here, the roof color, and then we'll do a little bit more of a red mix going down this way. And then over here, draw the roof line in here as well. And then we're going to let that dry before we get the highlights in on it. I'm going to get that paint out of my brush. All right, so I'm going to take some of this lighter green. I'm just going to work in a few more little grassy areas with this light green color with just little simple little grass strokes here. And I'm going to leave it a little bit more flat back here. We are going to have a little path back there, but as it gets further away, you're not going to be able to see as much detail of any grassy areas. I'm just going to make some little vertical strokes here, and I'll blend the bottoms of those out a little bit. Take some of this darker green, let me work that in over here a little more. There we go. We may play with that just a little more. What I want to do now though is I want to work on my little crop area. I want to start to go from light to dark this way. So I'm going to use some of this light green and just work it in, not everywhere, but just along in here as well. And I'm going to do that all along here. Back into there. And this is very impressionistic. I'm not trying to create detail. I'm just trying to create just brush strokes here. And then I'm going to start to work in a little bit more of the yellow as I come more to this side. So it's more of the yellow mixed with some of that green, but it's brighter and more yellow than this part here. Take some of my blue and mix it into the yellow mixture and come in and maybe work some of that in at the base. So I want it to be more blue. Maybe even grab a little bit of the purple and bring it in there and mix that into this lighter green color. Keeping it more blue. There we go. And working that in. Just getting a little bit more blue mixed with a tiny bit of the green. And bringing that in. I'm going to get that out of my brush. I'm going to come in and pick up some burnt sienna with a little bit of orange and a tad bit of my titanium white, and just come in and start to work that in as well. I'm just going to scumble that into these little paths here. I'm starting to warm the painting up a little bit more. And I'm leaving some of the color that's underneath in there, still showing through in little spots. And it's just about, it's equal parts burnt sienna and orange. Maybe leaning slightly to the orange a little bit more. I'm going to work that up into these little plant areas. And I'm going to make it a little bit more lighter over on this side in little spaces. And then a little bit more burnt sienna back in this area to the back. And as I come closer to the bottom of the canvas, I'm going to start to add a little bit more burnt sienna than the orange. It's getting a little bit darker. As we get closer in here. And if I've lost a little bit of my sand line between the crops, I can put that back in as well. Picking up a little bit more water as I go so the paint keeps moving onto the canvas easily. And as I come closer in down here, I added a little purple to my burnt sienna and orange. It's a nice warm day, so I have my studio door open. You can hear the birds out there. And the deer have been passing through. It's a bit more purple there than I wanted. There we go. All right. Get a little bit more orange just to dot through in some spaces here. I do want a little pathway that kind of is just going to come in and just maybe lead us into this little barn area here. So let's see if I can just get this orange color that I'm using down here with the burnt sienna and white. Just using the same colors I was using down here. I'm just going to make a little dirt pathway through here. Kind of comes up to the barn. And I'm going to keep my little strokes here as I create this path. I'm keeping them so that they are level with the ground. So if I make a stroke going this way, it's not going to look as though the path is laying flat. Now I'm going to take some of that green and just dot it. This is just Hooker's green, just dotting it in the center and tapping it with my finger here. There's some grass coming up through the path, and I'm going to make that path a little wider on each side here. It's just an old dirt path. And we may even have some of that dirt color showing through some of these little areas here because it's a wild field. So maybe we want to just put little pieces of it down in here. All right, and we'll play with that path a little bit more later. We'll let that dry. I'm going to get the paint out of our brush. So now the painting is dry. I'm going to be using my filbert brush, and I'm going to start to add in some colors to warm it up, to brighten it. And I'm going to work from back to front, so from the sky forward to the the crops in the bottom. And I'm gonna start by, I wanna lighten my sky a little bit over here. So I've dampened my filbert brush and I've wiped off the excess water. And I'm gonna come in and I've cleaned up my palette a little bit, refreshed my water, and I'm gonna pick up a little bit of the blue and pull in quite a bit of my titanium white. And I'm just gonna go in and just lighten up. I'm gonna add a little bit more blue to that and just lighten it up. I want it to be brighter in spots. And I'm just scumbling it in. Picking up a little bit more. I added a little blue to that. I'm gonna come in and work that in. And I'm even gonna take my finger a little bit and just blend with my finger here a little. I'll put my finger in some water and I'm just gonna blend that out. So it's always good to step back and look at your painting and assess things that you may like, things that you want to shift a little. You don't have to take what you've done at face value. You can always change it a little bit. I just wanted to lighten that up almost all the way over to the barn. And I'm gonna wet my finger and just blend that in. And give that a little bit more of a blend to make sure it settles into the sky a little more. So I like that better. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get that paint out of my brush. So what I've decided to do is I'm gonna brighten it up here, maybe with some more yellow greens, and hit a little bit more of the yellow greens up in some of these higher parts of my trees. So I've got my cadmium yellow medium. I'm gonna bring in some of my titanium white, and I'm gonna bring in a little bit of my hooker's green. So it creates this brighter green yellow color. So I'm gonna mix up a little bit more of that. So mostly yellow, bring in a little bit of the green and a touch of the white. I'm gonna see about putting that back here and just using my finger to blend some of that in. So I don't want to cover all of my green, but I do want to get some light hitting back through here and bringing my eye closer to the barn. You can go back and add a little bit more of the green to that and just start to work that in a little more into some areas. And I may even hit some of that on the little grassy areas that are making my pathway, and we're gonna work on the path a little bit more. Just a little bit. And then I'm gonna take some of that same yellow. I'm gonna continue to add a little bit more of the green to it and maybe start to hit that in little areas along the way. So maybe here's where, if there's just some really harsh brush marks that I don't like, or little areas I want to brighten up a little bit, I'm going to do that. And some of your strokes can be vertical, some can be horizontal. I'm just working some of them in using the very tip of the brush. Then I'm going to take just some of my hooker's green without rinsing the brush. I'm going to pull that out and just maybe work some of that in as well. And just blend it all in. just to have a few more loose strokes there. And I'm going to take some of that yellow green and just hit it on more on the left side of these areas. Not everywhere, but definitely bringing some over toward the barn just to get a nice warm glow, because this is more of a summer day and I want to convey that with some of my color. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to clean out my brush. I'm going to pull out some of my sienna, and so some of that green color can come right off in that sienna. Pick up a little bit more of my white, and I'm just going to start to hit some of the path areas with that. I'm going to a little bit more sienna in that. There we go. And just work that in. I'm just going to hit that in. And then here's where I'm going to touch into my unbleached titanium white. I'm going to bring some of that over and mix it into that same burnt sienna mix and start to work that in as well. Right into this little path area. I'm going to come back up into my green. I'm not rinsing out my brush, I'm just working back and forth. Maybe work some of that green along the edge of my path here. And blend that out. And then I can take some of that titanium white burnt sienna green mix and maybe brush that in as though there's like sandy bits poking through the grass. This is a rough farm field. It's not anything that's manicured. And I may even hit along some of this line here where I feel like maybe there's areas that are just too straight and perfect. And I'm just gonna scumble some of that in as well. Take some more of my hooker's green and some purple, maybe even a touch of blue, and just hit some little dark areas down at the base, again, of some of these trees, just to create this sense of grounding at the base of some of the trees back here. So I'm going to come back into my hooker's green and my yellow here. I didn't rinse my brush out, and get some of the grassy areas back in here. Simulate that rough little path. I may even take some of that and work that with some of these vertical strokes to break up some of this. This looks like a big mass of green here, and I just want to give it a little bit more breaking up of that massive green color. And maybe even taking some of that yellow green color and making some little vertical strokes right along that path edge there. Okay. A little bit more of the yellow green back here. Maybe even hitting some of that sunlight grassy color. So taking my yellow, my green, and hitting some of that grassy yellow right in front of the barn here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean the brush out. I'm still going to be using the same brush. We're still working here just to brighten things. Okay, so I'm going to refine my crops a little bit. I've got all the paint out of my brush, and I'm going to be using mostly blue with a little bit of purple. And there you go. And I'm going to take some of that ultramarine blue and purple mix and just start to work that in down at the base. And I'm not putting it everywhere, I'm just dropping it in just to settle in some of these plants. And we're given the illusion of plants here. And the reason that I'm doing this little purple blue color at the base is I'm going to be adding a little bit more brighter yellow green colors at the tops of the plants. And those two colors are complements of each other. And also the blue is a complement to that orange color that's mixed into my soil between the rows. So I'm still just working with blue purple mixture, about 50% of each of those. And here's where you start to make decisions about what is cohesive in my painting and what seems a little off. And I'm going to take some of this purple blue color, pop it at the base along some of the tree line here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some white to that purple blue color. I'm just going to start to maybe put some of that in here to create that there's darkness, but maybe there's some light coming in a little bit. And we're going to be working on the outside of the barn a little bit more. All right, that's great. I feel like that's grounding those plants a little more. I'm going to go ahead and rinse my brush out so we can finish the barn. Okay, so I'm going to take some of my orange, the cadmium orange. I'm going to mix in a little titanium white and red. And I want to create a color that's leaning orangish red, but is lighter than what I have on the barn already. Let's see what this looks like. That's great. So what I'm going to do is, I like the way that's looking. I'm going to add just a little bit more red to it. I want this to be a dry brush stroke. So I've dried my brush out and I just have the paint on the tip of the brush, and I'm just going to start to drag that brush down. And some of the paint's going to stay on the brush and some of it's going to come off, and it's a very light touch. So it gives a little variation of color, and it gives the sense that the barn may be a little bit more worn from being outside. And even this side, I'm going to put a little red there. Now this side of the barn, closest to the right side of my canvas, is going to be a little darker. So I'm going to add a little bit more red to that mixture. But I'm still going to bring down that dry brush stroke to give it a nice weathered look. And we're going to add shadow underneath our roof in just a few minutes. I'm just making strokes that are long vertical strokes that go along the shape of the barn. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to rinse my brush out. I'm going to go ahead and get some of my blue and work that in with some white. So that orange is going to kick my blue back a little bit. And I'm going to bring that up and I'm going to dry brush that on as well to my barn. And with that, I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna into that color. And I'm going to brush that in as well to give it some variation. Go back into that blue color. And I want to create that nice little thick roof line here. So I'm going to put some paint on the very tip of my brush and pull it down on each of these sides, and then here, and then even along the edge here. I'm going to have that overhang a little more. I'm going to bring that overhang down a little bit more there. There we go. And we'll work on getting some shadow in the barn underneath that little area here. I'm going to blend that in a little bit with my finger. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more of my titanium white to this mixture. So it's the blue, a little burnt sienna, and some of the red. Then I'm going to go ahead and start to work that in as well, especially at the very top. It gives it that nice weathered look. And if you want, you can blend that down with your finger. And I may even hit some of that just a little bit in here, and a little bit in here. Get some light spots in the barn. I'm going to get that paint on my brush so that I can get a little bit more of a shadow underneath my roof line. So I've got that paint on my brush. I'm going to take my red, and I'm just going to start to, this is just the cadmium red only, and just start to hit it very lightly underneath my roof line on each side. And then I can blend that down with my finger. I'm going to add a little bit more purple to that red on this side. I just pulled over some of my purple. Now I'll bring it in under here, because this is more of a shadow side, and that purple is going to help create a little bit more of a shadow underneath where the roof line is. Just that illusion. All right, so I'm going to let my barn dry. We're going to come back with our little small brush and kind of work in a few more little areas into the barn, but I just want it to dry because I do want this side to be even brighter by adding a little bit more of the weathered look with a smaller brush. So I'm going to rinse this brush out just so I can get some more highlights in my sand. I want to get the barn color out. Once I get all the color out of my brush, I'm going to come into my unbleached titanium white. I'm going to add a little orange to that and a little burnt sienna. And I'm going to come in and start to sweep that in along my sandy areas. So it's about maybe about as much of my titanium white as I have of my orange. And then a little bit of the sienna, just to kick it back a little bit. I'm going to just keep working this color in a little bit into the sand, but I don't want to cover up all of what I've put down already. Just working that in, maybe even working it up into the plants a little bit so it's not a straight line, so everything gets even more settled in here. And while I'm filling this in, while I'm doing this, one of the things that I'm always thinking about when I'm painting is that the only way that you can do something is just by doing it. It's not necessarily that practice makes perfect, because I don't really think that's true. We're not really striving for perfection. We're just having fun and enjoying what it is that you like to do, no matter what it is, whether it's painting or anything else in your life. It doesn't have to be perfect. If we're waiting for anything in our life to be perfect, we're going to be waiting a long time. I mean, that is not going to happen in everything that we do. So just enjoy the process. Just pull out your paints and your canvas and try to put something down, because that's the only way that you can start to, only by, you know, giving it a little try and messing up. You learn from the mess ups, from the bad examples. One of my good friends always says, anybody can be an example. So I think that's true with anything, even if it's a bad example. A good example of a bad example. Even that's a teachable moment. And just don't be afraid to try it. It's not always going to turn out the way you want it to turn out. And then sometimes you're going to hit the jackpot of what you want. And I'm going to take some of this brighter color that I have, and I'm going to work it back here into this little path area that is guiding us to the barn. I'm going to do a little bit more burnt sienna down in these little corners down here, and maybe even a little bit more burnt sienna right in here. And I may even take some of this little color and just for fun, just pop it in back here. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. And I love to do that because it brings a little bit of cohesion and character to every painting when you've got these little bright colors and you want to touch them into little places that maybe they're unexpected to be there. They're not, nobody's expecting that color to be there, but it's there and their eye just gets drawn into it. All right, I'm liking that. So I'm gonna rinse this brush out and we're gonna move on to our small round brush to finish out some of the barn color and some of the plants in the front. All right, so I'm putting in a little bit more, I mixed up some titanium white, a little touch of orange, but more red than orange. And I don't want a lot of paint on my brush, so I'm gonna come in, and let's see if this is light enough, but not too pink. There we go, and I'm just gonna make little strokes with my small round brush, but I'm not going all the way up to right underneath the roof line. I want to keep that little shadow there. And I'm just coming down, and you can use a small flat brush for this if you want. I'm just going to use the round brush just to make these small round strokes. And then I'm going to come over into my blue, pick a little bit of that up, and I'm going to mix it in to this same mixture. It gives it kind of almost a greenish blue hue. And I'm going to bring my roof line out a little bit here, over that. And then I'm going to bring my roof line out. I'm going to add a little white, a little more white to that. I want this side of the roof line to have some little highlights. Blend that out with my finger a little bit. And there's that. And then I'm going to take that same little color and just start to hit in areas on the roof. And then on this side, I want a roof line, but I want it to be a little darker. So I'm going to add some blue back into that. And bring that here. And you can even come over a little bit. There we go. Just a slight overhang. A little white along in here, so you know where the roof line is there. And then it kind of curves around there. And I'm going to dip just into my titanium white and just hit that a little bit while this is still wet, just to bring that roof line out so we can understand in our mind where that is. And then I'm going to get that paint out of my brush and I'm going to go right into my white, just a little, just maybe hit that in slightly and rub that in little areas. I'm not putting much on, just want a little bit more of a weathered look, so I'm just adding that in. And I might even hit some along the edge of my doorway here just to refine that little edge of the doorway. There we go. I like that. I'm going to settle my barn in a little bit, so I'm going to take, while I have the small brush, I don't need to rinse it out. I'm just going to pull up a few little grassy areas. And this is the darker green. I just took some of the hooker's green and just working some grassy areas around the barn on this side. And I'm going to add a little bit more to the yellow on this side just because I want this to have a brighter look on this side. I may even take some of that yellow and work a little bit more of that into here. I'm going to take some of that yellow and maybe plop that in. Not really thinking too much about it, just putting some in these higher areas of the trees here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my yellow and I'm going to brighten this green up even more. So I'm just pulling some yellow over into my hooker's green. So I want to come down into these little bottom areas and just create some really bright strokes in the very front parts of these little crop rows. So just adding in some of that yellow, and I can take it back a little bit, but I don't want to go too far back with it. To brighten this up. And these are, it's almost as though I've got my brush really loose and I'm maybe writing in cursive here. It's just side strokes, up and down strokes, angled strokes, just to get this feeling of some of the plants being a little bit brighter in some areas. And I'm gonna hit a little bit of it back in these back rows, but I'm not gonna do too much back here. I really want these brighter strokes to stay forward more. And I'll put a few here. And a few here. So I'm going to rinse this paint out of my brush. I'm going to let everything dry to do the last two things that we need to do. So I have you zoomed in a little bit to the sky because I'm going to put a few little small birds in, and I'm going to mix up some of my orange and blue to make a chromatic black. So I've got orange and my blue, and I'm just going to mix those together and create this nice little dark color. And I'm going to be using a small brush to create just a few small distant birds. And I'm going to get this a little bit more wet. And I'm going to roll my brush into it so it creates a nice fine point. So I'm loading up that color on my brush, and you can use a liner brush, a smaller brush for this, or even a little paint pen if you want. And I'm going to come right into this, and I'm just doing a little M shape almost. So it's a curve, and then another little curve. It's just a little, think of a little M shape. So it's two little bumps. And once you have your three birds in, we're going to do the next step, which is to sign the painting. All right, so I've zoomed you back out. I'm going to sign my painting over here. I'm just going to use my burnt sienna only. So feel free to keep adding anything. If you want to do some more highlights, add maybe a few chickens in the yard, whatever it is that you would like to do. But we're going to call it done. Thank you for keeping me company today, and hope you created something special for yourself. Until next time, bye-bye.